population.
The Prime Minister has just begun speaking at a press conference at the ASEAN conference in Bangkok. Here he is now.
On the Indo-Pacific, which is Australia's strategic focus, is incredibly important. It's about jobs, and it's also about the security of our region, keeping it open, ensuring that all of the independent and sovereign nations in our part of the world can continue to engage with each other. Supply chains are built up, which is good for Australia. We're here because of the jobs of Australians and ensuring the future jobs of Australians. Before I go to other matters, I also was pleased, as I'm sure all Australians were, to get the news, and particularly for those who are on the ground, of the rainfall in the western parts of New South Wales and in Queensland as well. Reports of anywhere between 15 mil and even to over 100 mil in Queensland. Now, I know this isn't breaking the drought, but I tell you, it's respite rain. It's respite rain which will give some real encouragement and some peace of mind for people right across our drought-affected areas of the country. And we hope and pray for more, and the government is obviously going through the final stages of its next set of announcements when it comes to providing drought support. And when Simon and I return to Australia, we'll obviously be pursuing that as measures have now been coming up, working with our partners both in the agricultural sector and within the government to deliver that next round of responses. We don't set and forget on drought. We continue to step up as things continue to progress with the drought-affected areas of the country. We'll continue to make our response. But here, back in Thailand, back here at ASEAN and at the East Asia Summit, the focus is on continuing to work with our great partners. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to meet with Premier Li Keqiang, with Simon and the rest of my team. It was a very positive meeting. It was a very honest meeting. It was a meeting that was very honest about what we're already achieving in our partnership. And China's economic growth has brought great benefits to Australia. And we welcome that. And it's not just here that I've done that, but I've done it in all places where I've been in various summits and other gatherings around the world. That growth in China will remain important for Australia into the future. And so we acknowledge that. There's some 200 billion, I should say, in trade that occurs between Australia and China on a yearly basis. This is massively important to us. We've got 200,000 Chinese students that are in Australia. We've got almost $70 billion of investment. China is our fifth largest investor. Of course, the United States is our biggest investment partner. But this relationship is already achieving things, and it continues to achieve things. But we want to ensure it achieves more in the future. And it was a very candid meeting about the ways we can ensure that that is achieved for both countries into the future. So I thank Premier Li Keqiang for the very honest engagement we had yesterday. We recognise we've got a great relationship, but we know it can be even better. And when we address some important issues about how we continue to engage, and I look forward to doing that in the future. So with that, happy to take some questions.
What example of those important issues in there that continue to engage? Can you give an example?
Well, the regularity of our engagement, the strategic economic dialogue, for example. I mean, that is an important part of the comprehensive partnership that we have, where you can deal with issues, whether it's the anti-dumping measures we've got currently in relation to barley, or there's issues around the licensing of abattoirs in Australia. These are just very practical commercial issues that are part of our partnership, and these are matters that we're seeking to progress, and appreciate the hearing we had on those matters yesterday. Yeah.
Just ask you on ASEAN. You've got the meeting tonight, so it's a little bit preemptive, but how important is it, not just for Australia but other ASEAN countries, that India is part of the final deal, and is there a prospect of the other 15 nations proceeding with finalising it and waiting for India to jump on board?
Well, the door will always be open to India, and it's always been our view, and of many that sit around the table, that this is a bigger and better deal with India in it, and I think patience is the virtue in this, and continuing to enable that to be achieved. And there's been enormous progress made, and Simon might want to speak specifically about this. The text of RCEP is done. The market access arrangements substantively between all the participants is also done. But we want to keep the opportunity for this arrangement to be bigger. I mean, overall, I think it's about 32%, is it, Simon, of the world's economy that's covered with India in. It's just under 30% with India out. But I think it's important to have India in, and that's certainly our preference, and to leave open the door, the mechanism. Let's not forget, I mean, that this RCEP arrangement is twice as big as TPP. That's how big it is. And this would be one for the first time that would bring together India and China into that arrangement. And so these are important things worth being patient for.
Chinese Premier yesterday, is also a potential visit to China, or did he invite you to visit China?
We discussed many things. I'm not going to go into the details of all of it because that's the nature of these meetings, but we did talk about the need to keep up the continuity of our dialogue. And the meetings that you hold as part of our comprehensive strategic partnership are really important. Whether it's, I mean, we've had many meetings. I mean, Simon has met with his counterpart on 2 occasions in the last year. Maurice Payne has done the same thing. And so there is a lot of that happening in the relationship. And so we want to see that continue. And I look forward to those meetings with my counterparts again in the future. Simon.
By the way you've been speaking, it sounds very unlikely that India will be part of the agreement later today. Is that your expectation?
Well, I might let Simon comment on where he sees all that at.
Well, thanks, PM. And I think it's important with RCEP absolutely to appreciate firstly the scale of RCEP. The degree of difficulty in landing a trade agreement of this scale is commensurate with its size, and the fact that we're talking about 32% of global GDP, 29% if you don't have India, still shows that it's an enormous agreement. Now, my understanding is, and I welcome the fact from all of our dialogue with India, that India is going to continue discussions and negotiations, and our door, as the PM said, is always open to India. And we have been through this sort of process with big trade agreements before. In relation to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, of course, we had hoped and expected the United States to be a partner there. The door in the TPP remains firmly open to the US. We want India to be a partner here as well, but we have to make sure that progress is realised amongst the 15 nations who are there without India, to make sure that we do capture the benefits that can come from greater openness within our region, greater integration in terms of value chains, more common rules of origin. These are the things that make it easier for Australian businesses to do business through the region, and that's what allows us to keep growing our exports. And in all of this, we have to remember that over the last year, Australia has achieved record levels of exports, record trade surpluses, and all of that fuels jobs in Australian businesses, and that's why we keep pushing ahead to create more job opportunities for those businesses.
Yep.
China has made it sound as if the Premier had a couple of quite stern messages. Did you have some stern messages from him?
I wouldn't characterise it in those terms at all, and I'm not quite sure why you have, because I've seen the statement that the Chinese have issued, and I didn't read any of that into that statement at all, and that was certainly not the nature of the discussion yesterday at all. I thought it was a very positive discussion, a very good-natured one, one that understood the value of the relationship and wanting to put more value into the relationship. That was very much the nature of the discussion. So no, I wouldn't characterise it in the terms you have at all.
How do you characterise it as a good relationship when, obviously, and you said there was a candid meeting in front of each other about certain things, but just last week Beijing issued a pretty stern rebuke to your own foreign minister after she raised in a speech concerns about China's human rights record. Is there a disconnect between saying the relationship is strong and yet every time we raise an issue there does seem to be this public?
No, because there's an honest acknowledgement, as we did yesterday, that we're two very different countries. We're a liberal democracy. They're a Communist Party state. We're not seeking to adopt their system, and they're not seeking to adopt ours. And so there's an honesty about understanding the differences between those two outlooks. And that was honestly discussed yesterday and understood. And so those types of disagreements from time to time, both the Premier and I are very committed to ensure don't overtake or overwhelm the rest of the relationship. I know in the commentary it can, but in the substance of the relationship, when the dialogue is taking place between leaders, it does not. And it did not yesterday. There was I think a maturity in the discussion yesterday that understood the nature of our two countries and where the benefits are by working close together on the things we agree on, understanding the areas where we'll have a difference of view. There is nothing, I think, extraordinary about that. There's nothing extraordinary about that at all.
And Matt,
Ellen.
Matt, can I just add there? Tonight, I will leave to go to Shanghai, joined with 200 Australian businesses attending the China International Import Expo, and we are there at the invitation of the Chinese government. I'm there, and the 200 Australian businesses are there as a demonstration of the strength of the relationship. Our presence will be one of the largest of any nations who are there, and we're doing so, cementing those positive aspects of the relationship. And it's a demonstration that, yes, there are, as there always are, points of difference, but the points of difference don't prevent you from proceeding with the areas of cooperation.
There was also a very good recognition and acknowledgement that Australia's position on these relationships is done independently and as a sovereign nation in pursuit of our own interests. That we engage directly, that our relationship with China is one about China and Australia and nothing else. We're pursuing our interests, they're pursuing theirs, and there's quite an overlap. And we talked about overlaps in everything from the environment and plastics pollution through to the very good work we do on health, particularly up in Papua New Guinea, which deals with malaria. We were talking about issues of infrastructure development. There was quite a range of issues that we discussed where the interests completely align. And where that happens, great. And where they don't, well, they're not matters that we take forward together. Yeah, Ellen.
Are you disappointed that President Trump isn't here?
Well, it's not for me to be disappointed or not disappointed one way or the other. That's entirely a matter for the United States, and it's entirely a matter for the hosts. We are a guest, and we've been very happy to accept the invitation, as we have done always. And I thank ASEAN in particular, and I thank the Thai Prime Minister for his very warm welcome to Australia, and for the way that ASEAN leaders have engaged Australia in these events for many years. So I'll leave those matters to the Americans and to the hosts.
China,
Yeah.
APEC's been cancelled. Would you like to, it's been now 3 years since the Prime Minister has met with President Xi. Would you like to...
Well, I've seen President Xi on a number of occasions.
In official bilateral capacity, would you like to get some of that within the next 12 months or the next meeting?
Well, again...
How important is that in terms of symbolism?
Well, as you know, I'm not one who's big on symbolism. I'm big on actions and the practical value of the relationship, and I just ran through the key statistics that define certainly the economic side of that relationship. We will continue to progress the relationship through the partnership structure that we have. And what I received yesterday was a strong commitment from China wanting to do the same. So, you know, we know what the next steps are in taking the relationship forward. We discussed those yesterday, and we look forward to pursuing those in the months ahead.
Did you raise with China the detention of Chinese Australian
Well, we deal with lots of sensitive issues in these discussions, and as we did again, and that's the nature of the candid relationship that we have. But we deal with those in those private discussions.
Prime Minister, you've said that the US presence here is a matter for them and for the host nation. But yourself and your senior ministers, as recently as last Friday, with the Reynolds, have called for the US to really ramp up its efforts in the Indo-Pacific.
Yes.
So how does it sit with you to see pictures coming in overnight of Donald Trump sitting at a UFC fight at Madison Square Garden instead of being engaged in these dialogues?
It's not about how it sits with me. This job isn't about how I feel. This job is about what we do and what we do in Australia's interests. See, I'm here with Simon to pursue Australia's interests and jobs for Australians and the safety of Australians in the wonderful work we do with our ASEAN partners. I'm sure many of you know the tremendous relationships we have on counter-terrorism across our ASEAN partners. I'll be meeting with President Widodo later today. We'll talk about that. I've just been meeting with Prime Minister Mahathir, whom we've got an outstanding relationship when it comes to dealing with security matters within our region. So that's why I'm here. I'm not here to run a commentary on people in other places. I'm here to pursue the interests of Australians and their jobs.
Can I just ask, how can you respond to concern about toxic culture within the Department of
Could you be more specific?
West Australia has recently reported that the Deputy Secretary of the Department is under investigation, and we've been told that there are concerns about toxic culture within the Department of Treasury.
Well, if you're referring to allegations regarding a public servant working for the Department of Treasury, you'd also be aware that they would be matters that would be dealt with by the department and the department secretary, and there's a proper process that would follow in those circumstances, and my job would be to ensure that I allowed those proper processes to be followed and reach their conclusions. That's what my job would be. Yes, Simon? Yeah.
So, India is carved out for the moment, I don't use that term, but we've got bilateral relationships with trade relationships with all the ASEAN members, plus others. So what benefit is ASEAN to us without India?
Well, no, look, there's a bigger benefit to Australia in the broader integration of the Indo-Pacific. I mean, Simon made the point about value chains, I make the point about supply chains. The integration of the economies of the Indo-Pacific is incredibly important for the prosperity of the region, but also its security, of which Australia is also a beneficiary. This RCEP agreement encapsulates, if you like, the economic dimension of this Indo-Pacific concept that we have been pursuing now for many years, and not just Australia. I mean, its articulation from ASEAN was led by Indonesia, and we strongly supported that. So this, I hesitate to use the word because it's jargon, but this architecture, which how foreign affairs professionals refer to these things, this is actually very important for the region because it does provide, I think, a stability both to the commercial nature of relationships between businesses that are working in the region and giving that more certainty, and actually showing a clear way forward that we see businesses in this region all dealing with each other in a much more free and open commercial environment. Now, that's good for Australia because so much of what we do commercially in the world is in this part of the world, and the more successful this part of the world is, the more integrated it is, the more free and open trade is, the freedom of movement, the freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight. All of these issues are so important to people in Australia having jobs, getting jobs, and realising their own ambitions for themselves. So it is one of those big agreements, Simon, and that's why we need to be patient about it. And so I wouldn't describe it at all in terms of carve-outs. I'd talk about it in the inverse of that, with a very wide open door. I mean, I'll be meeting with Prime Minister Modi later today, and of course I'll be meeting with him in January, and there'll be further opportunities there.
And so, suggesting that too, that there's also quite a strategic element to this relationship.
Oh, massively.
Trade relationship.
It's bigger than
stabilising strategic
relationship.
What factors would be involved in that? How do you see that playing out in terms of the strategic?
Well, RCEP is the economic dimension of this, and where there's greater trade and prosperity being shared amongst all the countries of this region, well, that promotes stability itself by definition, and that's why it's important. I mean, ASEAN has been a great success over the last 45 years. They didn't actually come together to be a trading bloc or anything like that, as Prime Minister Mahathir just reminded me, and he'd know better than anyone because he's been around it pretty much the whole time. And he saw it as they did, as a way for these countries to preserve and pursue their own independence and sovereignty in this part of the world, and that's led to them engaging in the way that they have, and Australia has been a massive beneficiary of that by engaging with ASEAN.
So I mean, stability isn't just achieved through government-to-government cooperation. The fact that RCEP will provide a stronger framework for our businesses to cooperate, for the flow of people, and all of those aspects creates a greater sense of regional stability as well. In terms of your first question about, yes, Australia has agreements in place with all of the other RCEP partners at present except India. Some of those agreements, though, are old, and some of those agreements largely focused on opening up the goods services market. And there are real gains that Australia can get in terms of our services economy, financial services, areas of education, health sectors, in terms of the opportunity for Australian businesses to be better integrated in the work that they do and to have more open access to work in some of the other RCEP partners there. And so we're very focused on how we can value add to those existing agreements. So it's not, there's a regional piece there that provides the type of strategic benefits the PM's spoken of, but then there are also clearly still direct tangible gains that we can make by improving on the FTAs that already exist.
I think I've got time for one more because we've got Prime Minister Li. Ellen.
Prime Minister, who's your tip for the Melbourne Cup?
Well, I think it's vow and declare. Vow and declare. They're about 12-1. Now I think I was even on worse odds than that for the last election. So at 12-1, that probably looks pretty good in terms of I don't know if Newspol's running something on the Melbourne Cup this year, but I wouldn't be listening to that if they were. But it'd be great to see an Australian trained and ridden horse actually get home in the Melbourne Cup. There's a lot of international competitors this year. And so at 12-1, compared to some recent bets that have in the political sphere, that probably seems like a pretty good day. Thanks very much.
Thank you.